All right. Hey, thanks guys for coming out. Really appreciate it. I know there's the big EUC session going on, so guys coming here means a lot for me. My session, I'm Tom Fenton. My session is How Fat is Your Thin Client? I write for Storage Review Magazine with Brian Beeler and also Virtualization and Cloud Review. However, my daytime job is at ControlUp. And you'll kind of see where all three of these different kind of companies coming together, and how I developed this topic and why it was interesting to me. Like I said, I write for Storage Review. I think I'm the only one in the world that does reviews on thin clients. And so at Storage Review, we tend to get a lot of thin clients in. We get the HP, Lenovo. Just got done doing a nice write-up on the Lenovo Neo 50Q, which is a neat little device. And I also work with a lot of different thin client OSes. Work with iGel, Stratodesk, 10-Zig. We just got done doing a write-up on 10-Zig. And as I was writing my last one, I kind of came up with a question that I'd never really thought of before. How fat is a thin client? How much resources does it use when compared to running the native client on top of Windows or Linux, something like that? It's something I really never investigated before. And I started looking around and I just didn't see a whole lot of information on it. So I thought, hey, this is going to be a good topic. So for Virtualization and Cloud Review, I actually went through and wrote an article on it. And this presentation is kind of based on that. That said, I'm going to write another one on it a little bit later because some of the interesting things I found in the last bit. Like I said, I work for ControlUp. It makes software, VDI monitoring software. And I needed an agnostic tool so I could measure the performance of all these different devices, whether they're thin clients or Windows or Linux devices. And that's kind of what we do, so it worked out really well. And in particular, I was interested in kind of three different metrics. One was the amount of RAM it used, because a lot of the cost of clients is based on the RAM. And of course, the CPU performance was important, but what I really want to keep an eye on is the CPU queue length. And that's how many actions are queued up for the CPU to act on. So you want that, 1, 2. You don't want a whole lot of CPU queue length in there. And I thought, what kind of devices do I want to look at? Yeah, the first one, let me go for something that's cheap. The cheapest one I could find on Amazon. It was this $99 A-top nuke. Had a small processor and it only had two cores in it. Looked at it and its CPU mark number was fairly low, as 1300. And then I looked at some others. A lot of people repurpose devices. They either use existing devices in the company that are no longer, for example, able to run Windows 11, so they just aren't viable. So people just load one of the thin OSes on them and repurpose them that way. Or you can buy these things cheap. I bought this one for $120 from Dell refurbished on sale, so they're real reasonably priced. And then the last one that I looked at was this Max Tang, that guy down there. And the reason I did this is last year at VMworld, if you were a vExpert, and I humble brag, I am a vExpert, NetApp gave these to all the vExperts, so I had one of these hanging around. And the processor on the Intel Core and the processor on the 750 was an Intel Core i5 processor, and on the Max Tang was the Celeron processor. What I found interesting about these two, these two was, this one was done in 2015. They both have 4 threads, and they're fairly similar in how fast they run. And the numbers, this one's about 80% of that one. But the power is, this guy uses the newer one, the 2021, uses a third of the power of the newer one. I kind of found that interesting. I wanted to see how this played out. So the Max thing, the A-top nuke, I decided not to mess around with because it just didn't seem like it'd have enough juice to work. And so the way I conducted my test was fairly simplistic. I just brought up the native client. I actually attached a VMware test drive. You guys use VMware test drive? You should look into it. It's a great program that lets you use VMware resources to do things with, and one of them is Horizon Desktop. And I brought up a video. This one is the first guy doing a double backflip on a jet ski, and it has a lot of action in it, so I thought that'd be a good test. Went ahead and ran it. And this is on the Dell 7050, and it kind of blew me away. First of all, overall, how light the VDI client is. On Stratodesk, that's the OS I used, but I also tried it with iGel and Tenzig, and they all came about the same. He used only like 5 or 6% of the CPU, which, like I said, kind of surprised me. And then I installed Ubuntu 22.04 on it, installed the native client on it, and he used about 10%, so two to three times as much as running a bespoken thin client OS on it. And then, of course, I ran Windows on it, and it used 5 to 7 times as much CPU resources. The thin client, about twice as much as Linux. That was oh, by the way, the stuff in the yellow is when I was using the native client. Then I took a look at the RAM on it. And again, the thin client OSs, the spoken thin client OSs, maybe, under a gig. Again, just really surprised me how lightweight it was. And Linux, used a little bit more, about, 2.5 gig. It didn't really increase much. And then Windows, being Windows, ran about 7 times as much, used about 7 times as much RAM. And so I actually called the guys at Stratodesk, and I said, I know you guys are based on Linux. They actually use Ubuntu as their underlying operating system. How do you get that low? And he said, we just rip out everything that doesn't support running the native client. That's where we get it so low. But to double check it, I went ahead and ran it on the Max Tang with the J6412 on it. About the same results. Again, very lightweight process. Windows is using 7 times as much, 5 to 7 times as much, and Linux is using about 2 times as much. And the same with the RAM. This device only had 4 gig of RAM, so actually any of these would be okay on it. So that's kind of my results. And then I thought, that running a bespoken thin client OS is kind of interesting, but there's trade-offs, right? And the pros of running thin client, obviously it uses much less resources. You can get by with a very minimal hardware footprint. You can, less than 1 gig of RAM on it. However, when you do this, you got to remember that VMware is getting smarter, and it's offloading a lot of process to the device itself. So if you use things like multimedia redirection, you're going to want a bigger footprint. Or if you're running some kind of unified communication application like Teams or Zoom, those can be offloaded to the device itself, and you actually want to do that. So don't take this, I only need a device with 1 gig, 2 gig. You'd have to do some of your own testing with it. Other things, like I said, you can reuse, repurpose existing devices. You can, buy older devices. Like I said, the 7050 was about $120. And even with that, you can use that excess CPU for other things. Maybe you want to make it a print server, things like that. And if you buy a bespoken thin client, very few of them have fans. I mean, they don't have any moving parts at all, which is kind of nice if you're in an office environment, because it makes them very quiet, and everyone likes that. The thin clients are stateless devices. You just kind of pull them out, replace them. There isn't any user information on them. They're not dedicated to a single user like a PC or Linux machine is. And because they strip out all that stuff that they're not using, it makes them very secure. Tenzig, iGel, Stratodesk, all those guys are very security conscious. And there are some decent dedicated thin client management tools. So on the Pro, with all these pluses, why would you want to do something like run Linux or Windows on it? You can run local applications, right? I flew here from Portland. I needed to get my presentation up to date, and so you can run your local applications on it. You also got a lot more hardware configuration options, whether you need a GPU, maybe some local storage. And I think probably the biggest one is a lot of people already have Windows management infrastructure in place, so it makes it real easy to use them. But even if you do use a dedicated Windows device, you aren't going to have to buy the most expensive, most powerful one out there. So at the beginning, I said I didn't look at that $99 one, and I kind of wish I would have, because the native client is a single-threaded application. So even though the CPU mark score is fairly low, 1300, it's the single-threaded rating that you want to look at. And so that's why I'm going to rewrite the article, is because I am going to look at if something with 2 cores can deliver as well as something with 4 cores, because just the threaded application. And that's it. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. I'm also doing a presentation for Control Up tomorrow. If you'd like to sit in on that, you can kind of see some of the information, how I gathered that if you go to that one as well, the tool that I use. And thank you for coming to Vegas. And any Hunter S. Thompson fans out there? We got one. It never got weird enough for me, so enjoy Vegas, guys. Appreciate you coming out. I really do.